Is it possible to play Dungeons & Dragons solo? That's the question we're going to explore in this vlog, looking at two options. The first is from the perspective of being a dungeon master, and the second as a player. Now, certainly with all of the options and world building and social interaction with Dungeons & Dragons, the experience is very much, and there are lots of different ways to roleplay, the experience is very much the unknown. Sitting down with friends, creating a story, rolling some dice, taking some chances, and exploring the different narratives as they unfold through the adventure. The challenge in playing solo is twofold. Replicating that tabletop experience from the perspective of just you as a DM and or a player, but also from the perspective of, can we replicate that unknown? Can we replicate that feeling of, do I do this? Do I do that? Coming together with a plan and managing that. Now, yes, in an ideal world, I would love to play Dungeons & Dragons multiple times a week with great friends, with great players, with great dungeon masters. But there are times in life, maybe through work or school or other responsibilities, where you can't get to the table for a little while, and maybe you want to explore some solo action. Or likewise, as a dungeon master, you want to try out a new module. Or as a player, you have a couple of character ideas that you would love to just take through level 1 and see what happens when you get to level 20. So there are times when you're unable to connect with a group, or even if you are, where the solo experience has merit. And on a final note before we jump in, Dungeons & Dragons as an experience, as a rule set, I'd like us, and this is something that I strive for as both a player and a DM, to always be open to every opportunity. There is no just one way to explore the D&D universe. It's a toolkit. It's a tool set. Let's try it in all different ways. So it is possible, and it is suited to solo adventures. So let's look at it from the perspective of a DM. I write a new module, or I purchase a new module. I'm going to run a campaign, and I'm curious to see certain stress points, or I'm curious to see at certain areas how it's going to play out or how the party might work. So from this perspective, what I do is I create a party of 3 or 4 characters. I roll them up. I create them. We start out at level 1 or level 5, whatever the module is going to be. And I create a slight kind of AI bio of how they're going to operate. So the idea, if I'm playing a monk, this is how the monk is going to operate with challenges, or how in certain situations and scenarios where they're going to go, what they're going to do. Likewise, if I'm playing a fighter or a wizard. So this little bit of a character bio that is going to point to the actions that they're going to take. I take that, and now I inject that into the module. And as I take this imaginary party through the adventure, when it comes to a certain point to make a decision, well, I fall back to the bio. If goblins are attacking the village, what's the paladin going to do? We go in that direction. Now, the interesting thing about this, the unknown in the discovery, is in creating these little bios and this little kind of AI checklist of how they're going to operate and how each character is going to work. I do this before the module, before I even really know what I'm getting into. So this way I get to see, like, it's probably not a good idea to take these goblins head on. We're only level 1. We've got 4 members in the party, but the paladin wills it. We have to do it for Helm, and we're just going to charge in and do that. So it's the discovery of possibly taking the module in directions that are unexpected, or aspects from that perspective, and looking and saying, as a DM, I really don't know what's going to happen because I don't know when I flip that page or where we're going to go in the map. And certainly if I have to choose left or right, we can always randomize it. Running it and playing it in this way as a DM allows me to kind of step back and see how the module would unfold. See if there's certain scenarios that maybe I want to change, or maybe I want to tweak, or just certain scenarios that I know when I plan out a session, hey, this encounter is going to be a little bit longer. So instead of 30 minutes, maybe we want to have 45 or an hour, because there are a lot of intricacies or possibilities for role play. D&D is a simulation. Now let's jump in on the player side. There are really kind of 2 options to do this. The first is using an emulator. There are various emulators out there that involve dice, and essentially Mythic is one of them. It's fantastic. It can either run a module for you, or it can create something in the moment. and it's based on asking reasonable questions. And I am simplifying it tremendously. Asking reasonable questions. So I would create a first level character, and I would go into a dungeon, right? There's a random dungeon. I go in, I generate the first room. Is there a monster in this room? Well, there could be, but probably not because it's the first room. So maybe it's only a 10% chance. You roll on the Mythic emulator. You see what happens from there. This decision tree making of populating a dungeon or resolving an encounter, it's not just necessarily yes and no, but it's like yes, 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 or yes, yes, no, or yes, no, no. If I want to navigate and check with monsters and try to bluff my way past them, I can roll that DC. I can see what happens, apply it to the Mythic emulator. Now, the challenge with this, of course, is it's a little bit slower because there's a lot of dice checking. And certainly if you're playing with friends and you have a party, and I've done this just out of curiosity, you could have Mythic run the entire adventure for you. I could sit down at the table with my friends, and Mythic is the DM, and have different players handle different aspects of the adventure. So like you're going to handle the encounters and the dice rolls when there's monsters attacking. I'm going to handle the skill checks. You're going to handle this aspect. So it works, and it builds a nice little story. It allows you to play an adventure, but it is a little bit slower because you're checking with dice. Now, playing solo, that's not really that much of a problem because you're playing at your own pace. And if you go at a slower pace, it gives you a chance to imagine things and imagine the narrative and imagine the story in your mind. That's a possibility. The other possibility, and this is shifting things a little bit more tactical, are roleplay, R-O-L-L, versus roleplay, R-O-L-E, the random generators. In the D&D books, roll for location, roll for dungeon, roll for monster, roll for the furnishing, roll for treasure. I mean, we've seen this in every adventure, every iteration of D&D, going back to advanced Dungeons & Dragons, going back to Redbox. And this has been used by the DM for times where you just want to kind of populate a quick dungeon. Maybe you're a one-off adventure or an encounter, or you're thinking to yourself, well, let's create a random dungeon, base stock, and then I'll go back and really like refine it and tweak it. So it's a generator, a random generator, before there were online or virtual random generators. You can stock an entire dungeon from this. Now, I like to tweak it a little bit when I do this. And what I'll do is come up with kind of a backstory. It's a little bit generic. The idea, like, I'm at a local inn, someone sells me a map, they want me to go into the dungeon and recover a book, a scroll, an artifact, something. And it's somewhere in that dungeon. So I always play with permadeath. I go into the dungeon and we randomly generate, and I stock it with monsters as I open rooms and explore corridors. After I'm 3 or 4 rooms in, I will, if the room is furnished, I will roll a percentage dice, essentially asking the question, is the scroll, book, artifact, sword, magic object in this room that I'm supposed to recover? If it's yes, then I acquire it, assuming I defeat the encounter, if there is one, and then I get out. Or I can decide, we've got the object, let's explore a little bit more. Let's get some more XP. Let's get some more treasure. How much do I want to push my luck? And if I'm far in the dungeon, and sometimes asking this question of finding the object or finding the artifact, I'll get like 10, 15, 20 rooms in, find it. Now I have to get out. And on the way out, I always do random monsters, the potential for random encounters. Because I'm kicking down this dungeon. I'm raiding this dungeon. It's a whole ecosystem. There are other encounters in there. It's not just like, oh, I found it in room 10. Now I automatically teleport out of there or leave out of there. Although I guess I could if I'm high enough level. But this idea of an infinite dungeon, you got to make your way out. And there's going to be some random monsters and be some other encounters to deal with. So from that perspective, as a dungeon master, as a player, there are ways to immerse yourself and explore Dungeons & Dragons from the solo experience. Let's approach it from the perspective of D&D as a toolkit, something that we can utilize, something that we can explore in addition to tabletop.